Penguin Random House Audio presents The Popes Against the Jews, The Vatican's Role in the Rise of Modern Anti-Semitism, by David I. Kertzer, read for you by Arthur Morey. Introduction. Edward Cardinal Cassidy, Australian head of the Vatican's Commission for Religious Relations with the Jews, called in reporters to announce the long-awaited results of his investigation. It was March 16, 1998, 11 years after Pope John Paul II had asked the Commission to determine what responsibility, if any, the Church bore for the slaughter of millions of European Jews during World War II. For the Church, a more explosive subject could hardly be imagined. It had been 35 years since Rolf Hochhuth's play The Deputy had first raised the charge of papal complicity in the Holocaust, triggering Catholic outrage worldwide. Yet the suggestion that the Vatican bore any responsibility for what had happened to the Jews continued to grate on Catholic sensibilities. And so nervousness mixed with curiosity as the report was finally released to a public sharply divided between those worried that it might criticize the Church and those who feared it would not. Heightening the drama and underlining the significance of the event, the Pope himself wrote an introduction to the report. John Paul II hailed the Commission document, We Remember, a reflection on the Shoah, as an important part of Church preparations for the upcoming millennial celebrations. To properly observe the Jubilee, the Pope wrote, the Church's sons and daughters must purify their hearts by examining the responsibility they bore for sins committed in the past. He voiced the hope that by providing an accurate account of past evils, the Commission report would help ensure that such horrors as the Holocaust would never be repeated. The report's preamble echoed this theme, not only stressing the Pope's commitment to repentance for past sins, but also linking the proper understanding of the past to the building of a brighter future. At the heart of the problem, as the Vatican commissioners recognized, was the fact that the Holocaust had taken place in countries of long-standing Christian civilization. Might there be some link, they asked, between the destruction of Europe's Jews and the attitudes down the centuries of Christians toward the Jews? Those who feared that the report might criticize past popes or past Church actions were soon relieved to learn that the Commission's answer to this question was a resounding no. True, the report admitted, Jews had for centuries been discriminated against and used as scapegoats, and regrettably, certain misguided interpretations of Christian teachings had, on occasion, nurtured such behavior. But all this regarded an older history, one largely overcome by the beginning of the 1800s. In the Commission's view, the 19th century was the key period for understanding the roots of the Holocaust, and, in particular, the reasons why the Church bore no responsibility for it. It was in that turbulent century that new intellectual and political currents associated with extreme nationalism emerged. Amid the economic and social upheavals of the time, people started to accuse Jews of exercising a disproportionate influence. There thus began to spread, the Commission members argued, an anti-Judaism that was essentially more sociological and political than religious. This new form of antagonism to the Jews was further shaped by racial theories that first appeared in the latter part of the 19th century and reached their terrible apotheosis in the Nazis' glorification of a superior Aryan race. Far from supporting these racist ideologies, the Vatican commissioners asserted, the Church had always condemned them. And so, according to the report, a crucial distinction must be made. What arose in the late 19th century and sprouted like a poisonous weed in the 20th was anti-Semitism based on theories contrary to the constant teaching of the Church. This they contrasted with anti-Judaism, long-standing attitudes of mistrust and hostility, of which Christians also have been guilty, but which, in the Vatican report, had nothing to do with the hatred of the Jews that led to the Holocaust. When I read the news story of the Vatican press conference and later read the text of the Commission report, I knew that there was something terribly wrong with the history that the Vatican was recounting. It is a history that many wish had happened, but it is not what actually happened. It is the latter story, sometimes dramatic, sometimes hard to believe, often sad, that I try to tell in the pages that follow. Just how little this history is known was driven home to me by reader reactions to my recent book, The Kidnapping of Edgardo Mortara. The book tells of a 6-year-old Jewish boy in Bologna, Italy, who in 1858 was taken from his family on orders of the local inquisitor. Having been secretly baptized by a servant, or so it was claimed, the boy, the inquisitor argued, was now Catholic and could not remain in a Jewish household. "You mean there was still an Inquisition in 1858?" readers asked. "I thought the Inquisition was back in the 1500s or 1600s. I also kept hearing, especially from non-Jewish readers, how amazing it was for them to learn that forcing Jews to wear yellow badges and keeping them locked in ghettos were not inventions of the Nazis in the 20th century, but a policy that the popes had championed for hundreds of years. Although various histories of the fraught relations between the Roman Catholic Church and the Jews have been published, most focus on a more remote past. Others examine church doctrine, engage in biblical exegesis, or analyze various other texts, and so do not capture the actual struggle between the Church and the Jews. Someone, I thought, needed to write a book about the Church and the Jews in modern times, one that would use original archival documents, many never before examined, to tell a story that has remained in important ways unknown. This last point is worth emphasizing because, while recent scholarship, especially in Italy, has brought to light important new information about the Vatican and the Jews, much has remained buried in the archives. In this light, Cardinal Ratzinger's announcement in 1998 that, for the first time, the archives of the Holy Office of the Inquisition were being opened to scholars offered a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Sources never before seen by scholars were now available, offering the tantalizing prospect of new insights into church history. This book rests heavily on these newly available documents from the Inquisition archives, as well as from other Vatican archives that have become open to researchers in recent years. Together with evidence that has been reported in the specialized scholarly literature, mainly in Italy and France, over the past few years, these new sources shed light on a history that, until now, has remained hidden. Back in early 1998, news of the impending release of the Vatican report on the Holocaust had brought hope that the Church itself might help rectify the ignorance that surrounded the history of the Church's dealing with the Jews. Pope John Paul II had done much to foster an ecumenical spirit and warmer relations between the Catholic Church and the Jews, and he had called on the Commission to be fearless in confronting the truths of the past. The Commission did not take its task lightly, studying the question for over a decade before formulating its conclusions. Surely, 36 years after the Second Vatican Council opened, the time had come for the Church to face up to its own uncomfortable past. The report's key passage on the rise of modern anti-Semitism explains, "By the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century, Jews generally had achieved an equal standing with other citizens in most states, and a certain number of them held influential positions in society. But in that same historical context, notably in the 19th century, a false and exacerbated nationalism took hold. In a climate of eventful social change, Jews were often accused of exercising an influence disproportionate to their numbers. Thus there began to spread in varying degrees throughout most of Europe an anti-Judaism that was essentially more sociological and political than religious." The anti-Semitism embraced by the Nazi regime, the report goes on to say, was the product of this new social and political form of anti-Judaism.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?